The rain hammered down on the cracked pavement of Miller Street, turning the sidewalk into a mirror of gray skies and flickering neon signs. Sarah Martinez clutched her worn leather purse against her chest as she hurried toward the bus stop. Her shift at the diner had run late again, and now darkness had swallowed the neighborhood whole. At 63 years old, she'd learned to keep her head down and move quickly through these streets after sunset. Inside her purse had everything that mattered. $340 in cash, carefully saved over 2 months of double shifts and skipped lunches. Tomorrow was her grandson Miguel's 8th birthday, and she'd promised him that bicycle he'd been dreaming about all year. The red one with the silver handlebars that he'd pointed out in the shop window every single time they passed it. Sarah worked her fingers to the bone at that diner, serving coffee and clearing plates, enduring the occasional rude customer with a smile, because every tip brought her closer to seeing joy light up Miguel's face. She didn't notice the two figures detaching themselves from the shadows of an abandoned storefront. They moved with practiced coordination, jackets pulled up against the rain, eyes fixed on the elderly woman shuffling alone through the downpour. Marcus and Tony had been working this neighborhood for 6 months, targeting people who looked vulnerable and distracted. An old woman walking alone at night was exactly what they'd been waiting for. Behind them, completely unnoticed, another man had also been watching. Jason Statham had been walking back to his hotel after wrapping up a late location scout for his upcoming film. The production company had chosen this neighborhood specifically because it looked authentically rough, the kind of place where real life happened in all its gritty complexity. He'd sent his driver home hours ago, preferring to walk and absorb the atmosphere. 20 years of playing tough guys in movies had given him an instinct for recognizing real danger, and right now, every alarm bell in his head was ringing. Sarah reached the bus stop and checked the schedule posted on the grimy plastic shelter. 15 minutes until the next bus. She sighed and settled onto the bench, pulling her thin coat tighter. The rain showed no signs of letting up. She thought about Miguel, about his gap-toothed smile and the way he laughed when she made him pancakes shaped like dinosaurs. That boy was a whole world since her daughter passed away 3 years ago. Raising him on her pension and diner wages wasn't easy, but she'd walk through fire for that child. Marcus nudged Tony and jerked his chin toward Sarah. They'd refined their approach over months of practice. Get close fast, grab the purse, and disappear into the maze of alleys before anyone could react. Old people rarely fought back, and this one looked like she'd barely put up a struggle. They started moving, crossing the street at an angle that would bring them right up beside her. Jason's jaw tightened as he recognized what was about to happen. He'd seen this play out in a dozen movies, but this wasn't fiction. This was a real woman who was about to have a night destroyed by two predators who saw her as nothing more than an easy mark. He quickened his pace, his boots splashing through puddles as he closed the distance. Years of stunt training and fight choreography had left him in peak physical condition, and he moved with the fluid grace of someone completely comfortable in his body. Sarah sensed movement and looked up to see two young men approaching rapidly. Her heart lurched. She'd lived in cities long enough to recognize trouble when it came walking toward her. She stood up quickly, backing against the bus shelter, her hand instinctively tightening on her purse strap. This was everything she had. This was Miguel's birthday. She couldn't let them take it. Marcus reached her first, his hand shooting out toward the purse. "Give it up, lady. Don't make this hard." Sarah surprised him by jerking backward, her voice shaking but defiant. "No. Please, it's my grandson's birthday money." Tony moved to flank her, cutting off any escape route. The rain poured down harder, and the street remained empty. Just the three of them in this moment of violence about to unfold, and one other person, now just 10 feet away and closing fast. Marcus's fingers had just brushed the leather strap of Sarah's purse when a hand clamped down on his shoulder like a steel vise. The grip was so powerful, so completely unexpected, that Marcus froze instantly. He'd been in plenty of street confrontations, but he'd never felt anything quite like the pressure now radiating through his collarbone. It felt like his entire shoulder might crumble under that single hand. "I think the lady said no." The voice was calm, almost conversational, but carried an edge that made both men's blood run cold. Marcus turned his head slowly and found himself staring into the face of someone he recognized immediately. Jason Statham stood there in the rain, water streaming down his shaved head, his expression carved from granite. This wasn't a movie star posing for cameras. This was a real man behind the roles, and the danger radiating from him was absolutely genuine. Tony's eyes went wide. Holy shit, yo. Not important right now. Jason cut him off, his grip never loosening on Marcus's shoulder. What's important is that you two are going to apologize to this woman, turn around, and walk away. Or we can do this the hard way. Your choice, but you've got about 3 seconds to decide. Marcus tried to jerk free, his street instincts overriding his shock at the celebrity intervention. He was younger, probably figured he was tougher than some Hollywood actor who just pretended to fight for the cameras. Big mistake. Jason had trained in Brazilian jiu-jitsu, kickboxing, and a dozen other martial arts for decades. He didn't just play tough guys. He was the real deal. The moment Marcus pulled away, Jason's training took over. He shifted his weight smoothly, using Marcus's own momentum against him, and swept the young man's legs out from under him. Marcus hit the wet pavement hard, the air exploding from his lungs in a painful gasp. Before he could even process what had happened, Jason had dropped to one knee beside him, one hand pressed firmly against his chest, pinning him to the ground. "Stay down," Jason said quietly. It wasn't a threat. It was a simple statement of fact. Tony had a decision to make. He could run, leaving Marcus behind, or he could try to help his partner. Loyalty won out over common sense. He rushed forward, aiming a wild punch at Jason's head. The actor moved with practiced efficiency, tilting his head just enough for the fist to whistle past his ear. Then he rose in one fluid motion, caught Tony's extended arm, and redirected all that forward momentum into a throw that sent the second attacker sprawling across the sidewalk. Sarah stood pressed against the bus shelter, her purse clutched so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Her mind struggled to process what she was witnessing. One moment she'd been certain these men would rob her, possibly hurt her. The next, a Hollywood action star was taking them apart like it was nothing. The whole thing had lasted maybe 10 seconds. Marcus tried to get up again, and Jason simply placed his boot on the young man's chest, applying just enough pressure to keep him grounded. I said, "Stay down. I won't ask again nicely." "You can't do this." Marcus sputtered, rain mixing with the sweat on his face. "You're assaulting us." Jason actually laughed at that, though there was no humor in the sound. "You were attempting to rob an elderly woman. I'm witnessing a crime and intervening. Trust me, I know exactly where the legal line is, and you two cross it first. Now here's what's going to happen next. You're going to stay right there while I call the police, and then you're going to spend the night in jail thinking very carefully about your life choices." Tony had pulled himself to his knees, holding his bruised ribs. He looked at Jason, then at Marcus pinned under that boot, and the fight went out of him completely. "Look, man, we're sorry. We didn't mean anything. We're just trying to survive out here." Jason's expression didn't soften. Everybody's trying to survive. That doesn't give you the right to prey on people who are just trying to live their lives. You made a choice tonight, and choices have consequences. He pulled out his phone with his free hand, keeping his attention split between both men. His thumb hovered over the emergency call button. Sarah finally found her voice, stepping forward slightly. "Wait!" Everyone looked at her. She stood there in the rain, this small elderly woman who'd been terrified just moments ago, and something had changed in her expression. The fear was still there, but it had been joined by something else. Compassion, maybe, or understanding. "I don't want to press charges," she said quietly. Jason looked at her in surprise. These men tried to rob you. They need to face consequences." Sarah shook her head, her eyes moving between the two young men sprawled on the wet sidewalk. "I know, but look at them. They are barely more than boys. Putting them in jail won't fix whatever broke in their lives to bring them to this point. It'll just make them harder, angrier." She paused, then addressed Marcus and Tony directly. "I work at Rose's Diner, 3 blocks from here. If you're really trying to survive, if you're really hungry or desperate, come by during my shift. I'll make sure you get a meal. No judgment, no police. Just food and maybe a chance to talk about better choices." The silence that followed Sarah's offer hung in the rain-soaked air like a challenge to everything the night had been building toward. Jason studied her face, searching for any sign of fear or uncertainty, but found only a quiet determination that commanded more respect than any threat of violence could achieve. Here was a woman who'd been second away from losing everything she'd worked for, now offering kindness to the very people who'd tried to take it from her. It was a kind of genuine courage that made his movie heroics seem hollow by comparison. Marcus lay still under Jason's boot, his chest heaving with a mixture of exhaustion, shame, and something else he couldn't quite name. No one had ever responded to him like this before. His whole life had been a series of confrontations that ended in violence, arrests, or running away. Teachers had given up on him. Social workers had processed him. Police had arrested him. But no one had ever looked at him the way this old woman was looking at him now, like she actually saw a human being instead of a problem to be solved. Why? The word came out of Marcus before he could stop it. Why would you do that? We were going to rob you. Sarah stepped closer, her worn shoes splashing through puddles. The rain had plastered her gray hair to her head, and her coat hung heavy with water, but she seemed oblivious to the discomfort. Because somebody showed me kindness once when I needed it most. Because I have a grandson about your age, and I pray every night that if he ever makes a mistake, someone will give him a second chance instead of throwing him away. Jason slowly lifted his boot from Marcus's chest and stepped back, though his body remained coiled and ready to react if either man made a wrong move. He'd dealt with plenty of criminals in his movies, but this was uncharted territory. The script called for the hero to beat up the bad guys and hand them over to the authorities. Nobody had written a scene where the victim forgave her attackers and offered them a free meal. Tony pushed himself to his feet, water streaming from his jacket. His ribs ached where he'd hit the sidewalk, and his pride was shattered, but something in Sarah's word had cracked through the defensive armor he'd built around himself. You're serious? You'd actually feed us after what we tried to do. I've been where you are, Sarah said simply. Not exactly the same, but close enough. 20 years ago, after my husband died, I was so broke I was shoplifting food to feed my daughter. Got caught one day by a store manager named Frank. He could have called the police, could have gotten me arrested, and probably cost me custody of my child. Instead, he sat me down in his office and asked me what I needed. Turned out he knew someone who was hiring at the diner. Got me an interview, and I've been working there ever since. Frank saved my life that day by choosing to see my humanity instead of just my crime. Jason found himself oddly moved by her story. He'd grown up tough on the streets of Shirebrook, England, diving in martial arts providing his escape from a difficult childhood. He understood desperation and the fine line between survival and crossing into criminality. But somewhere along the way to fame and fortune, he'd forgotten what it felt like to be that desperate. This woman, barely scraping by on diner wages, remembered. She carried that understanding with her every day. So you're just going to let us walk away? Marcus asked, suspicion still coloring his tone. It seemed too good to be true, and in his experience, things that seemed too good to be true usually were. I'm giving you a choice, Sarah corrected him. You can walk away tonight and keep doing what you're doing. Keep robbing people. Keep running from the police. Keep living in fear and anger until it destroys you. Or you can walk away tonight and choose something different. Come to the diner. Let me help you find a better path. But if I ever see you out here again, terrorizing people just trying to get home safely, this offer disappears. This is a one-time chance to be better than the worst thing you've ever done. Marcus and Tony exchanged glances. Years of running together had taught them to communicate without words, and right now both would grapple with the same confused mixture of emotions. Shame at being caught. Humiliation at being taken down so easily. But also something else, something unfamiliar and uncomfortable. Hope, maybe, or at least the possibility of hope. Jason watched the dynamics playing out between the three of them and made a decision. He pulled out his wallet and extracted several bills, holding them out to Sarah. For what it's worth, I think what you're doing is remarkable. Add this to your grandson's birthday fund. And maybe use some of it to buy these two that meal you promised, if they are smart enough to take you up on the offer. Sarah's eyes widened as she realized he was offering her $500. Oh, I couldn't possibly. Please, Jason insisted. Consider it an investment in whatever happens next. I've played a lot of heroes, but you're the real thing. Let me help. Sarah accepted the money with trembling fingers, tears now mixing with the rain on her cheeks. Between what she'd saved and this unexpected gift, Miguel wouldn't just get his bicycle. He'd get the birthday party he deserved, the one she'd been afraid she couldn't afford. Her voice broke as she whispered, "Thank you." The four of them stood there in the rain, an unlikely tableau that would have seemed absurd if someone had tried to script it. A Hollywood action star, an elderly diner waitress, and two would-be muggers, all frozen in a moment of decision that could reshape all their futures. The bus stop's flickering light cast strange shadows across their faces, and somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, a reminder that the city's violence continued unabated beyond their small circle. Marcus was the first to move. He climbed slowly to his feet, his legs unsteady, his clothes soaked through and covered in grime from a pavement. He looked at Jason, then at Sarah, then down at his own shaking hands. For years, he'd been telling himself a story about who he was. He was a survivor. He did what he had to do. Society had failed him, so he owed society nothing. That story had made it easier to sleep at night, easier to justify the fear he saw in people's eyes when he and Tony approached them in the dark. But looking at Sarah now, seeing the genuine offer of kindness in her weathered face, that story started to crumble. She had every reason to hate him, to want him locked away, but instead she was offering him food and a second chance. It didn't make sense. Nothing in his 24 years of life had prepared him for this kind of response. "I don't understand you," Marcus said finally, his voice barely audible over the rain. "Why aren't you afraid of us? Why aren't you angry?" Sarah smiled sadly. "Oh, I was terrified. I still am, a little. And I'm angry too, angry that the world is so broken that young men like you feel like this is your only option. But fear and anger don't fix anything. They just make more fear and more anger. I'm tired of that cycle. Maybe it's time someone tried something different." Tony spoke up, his voice thick with emotion. "You don't know us. You don't know what we've done, the things we've had to do just to survive. We're not good people." "I don't need to know your whole story to know you're more than the worst things you've done," Sarah replied. "Everyone carries darkness. The question is whether we choose to let that darkness define us. My grandson Miguel, his growing up in the same neighborhood you did, facing the same struggles, the same temptations. Every time I look at him, I see all the ways a world could break him, could turn him into someone who hurts others just to feel less hurt himself. And I pray that if he ever reaches that breaking point, someone will care enough to pull him back from the edge." Jason had remained silent, watching the exchange with an intensity that came from really paying attention. This was what his movies always miss, the messy complexity of real human interaction, the way people could surprise you with both their capacity for cruelty and their potential for grace. He found himself thinking about all the times he played heroes who solved problems with their fists, who never questioned whether violence was really the answer. Standing here in the rain, he was seeing a different kind of heroism, one that required more courage than any stunt he'd ever performed. "She means it," Jason said suddenly, addressing Marcus and Tony directly. "I've been around long enough to know when someone's being genuine. This isn't a trick or a setup. She's really offering you a way out. Question is, are you brave enough to take it?" Marcus bristled at the word brave. "It doesn't take bravery to accept a handout, doesn't it?" Jason challenged. "I think it takes more guts to admit you need help, to swallow your pride and accept kindness from someone you tried to hurt, than it does to keep doing what you've been doing. Running around in the dark, taking from people weaker than you, that's easy. That's the coward's way. Facing up to your mistakes and trying to be better, that's the hard path." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He'd always thought of himself as tough, as someone who did hard things to survive in a hard world. But Jason was right. There was nothing brave about what he'd been doing. It was just fear wearing a mask of aggression. Fear that if he stopped running, stopped fighting, stopped taking, he'd have to confront the fact that his life had become something he barely recognized. Tony moved closer to his friend, their shoulders almost touching. They'd been through everything together since they were kids in the same failing foster system. They protected each other, stolen together, survived together. Whatever happened next, they'd face it together too. "What do you think?" Tony asked quietly. "Should we take her up on it?" Before Marcus could answer, the number 4-7 bus appeared through the rain, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Sarah glanced at it, then back at the two young men. "This is my bus. I need to get home to my grandson. But I work the morning shift at Rosie's Diner, 6 a.m. to 2 p.m., every day except Sunday. If you want that meal, if you want to talk about what comes next, you know where to find me. The choice is yours. It'll always be yours." She started toward the bus, then paused and looked back at Jason. "Thank you for what you did tonight. Not just for protecting me, but for seeing these boys as more than just criminals. The world needs more of that kind of seeing." Jason nodded, oddly humbled by the gratitude of this woman who had so much less than him but seemed to understand so much more about what really mattered. As Sarah climbed aboard the bus and it pulled away into the night, he turned back to Marcus and Tony. 3 weeks later, the morning sun filtered through the windows of Rosie's Diner, painting the worn vinyl booths and scuffed linoleum floors in shades of gold. The breakfast rush was just beginning, and Sarah moved between tables with practiced efficiency, coffee pot in one hand, order pad in the other. Her grandson's birthday party had been a triumph. Miguel's joy over that red bicycle something she'd replay in her memory forever. But the real change in her life had come from an unexpected direction. Marcus sat at the counter, carefully wiping down the already clean surface for the third time. He wore a simple white apron over his jeans and T-shirt, and his hands, which 3 weeks ago had reached for Sarah's purse with violent intent, now moved with deliberate carefulness. Rosie, the diner's owner, had been skeptical when Sarah first asked her to consider hiring the young man, but she trusted Sarah's judgment. That trust had paid off. Marcus showed up early, stayed late, and worked harder than any dishwasher she'd ever employed. Tony had taken a different path, but one equally promising. Sarah had connected him with a construction company that was willing to hire people with troubled pasts, and he was now learning a trade that paid honest wages. He stopped by the diner most mornings before his shift, sitting at the counter and eating the breakfast Sarah insisted on making him, their conversations ranging from small talk about the weather to deeper discussions about the futures they were both trying to build. The bell above the door chimed, and Sarah looked up from pouring coffee to see a familiar bald head ducking through the entrance. Jason Statham had become a semi-regular fixture at Rosie's Diner, stopping by whenever his shooting schedule allowed. His presence had initially caused quite a stir, but the regulars had gradually adapted to having a movie star drinking coffee alongside truck drivers and construction workers. "Morning, Sarah," Jason called out, sliding into his usual booth. "How's Miguel doing with that bicycle?" "Driving me crazy," Sarah laughed, the joy evident in her voice. "He wants to ride it everywhere, including inside the apartment. I've had to explain about physics and furniture 3 times this week. How's the movie coming?" "Wrapping up next week, actually." Jason accepted the coffee she poured with a grateful nod. "Then it's back to London for a few months. But I wanted to talk to you about something before I left." Sarah raised an eyebrow but said nothing, waiting for him to continue. Jason glanced at Marcus, who was now bussing tables, his movements efficient and purposeful. "What you did that night, what you continued to do for those boys, it got me thinking about the kind of impact one person can have. I spend my time pretending to be a hero, but you're out here actually being one." "I'm just a waitress trying to help where I can," Sarah protested. "You're more than that," Jason insisted. "You saw potential where everyone else saw problems. You chose compassion when you had every right to choose anger. That's heroism in its purest form." He pulled out an envelope and slid it across the table. "My production company wants to set up a scholarship fund, and I'd like you to help administer it. Nothing huge at first, but enough to help kids from this neighborhood get the chances they deserve. Job training, education, mentorship, whatever they need to break the cycle." Sarah's hands trembled as she picked up the envelope, her eyes scanning the contents. The amount listed made her breath catch. This wasn't just a generous donation. This was life-changing money, the kind that could make a real difference for dozens of young people. "Jason, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll help me make sure it goes to the people who need it most. You know this neighborhood. You understand these struggles. You're the perfect person to identify who needs help and make sure they get it." Jason leaned forward, his expression serious. "That night in the rain, you taught me something important. Violence isn't always the answer. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is offer a hand instead of a fist. I want to put that lesson into action." Marcus had stopped working and was watching their conversation from a respectful distance. Jason caught his eye and waved him over. The young man approached hesitantly, still not entirely comfortable with the presence of the celebrity who'd taken him down so effortlessly weeks ago. "Marcus, I've been talking to Rosie about your work here," Jason said. "She tells me you've been exceptional, reliable, hard-working, respectful. That takes real strength of character, especially given where you started." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I'm producing a documentary about second chances and redemption. Would you be willing to share your story? Let other people see that change is possible." Marcus looked at Sarah, seeking guidance. She smiled encouragingly, and he found his voice. "I don't know if my story is worth telling. I'm just trying to not be the person I was." "That's exactly why it's worth telling," Jason countered. "Because you're not unique. There are thousands of young people out there making the same choices you were making, thinking there's no other way. They need to see that someone like them chose a different path and survived. They need to know it's possible." Tony arrived then, still dusty from his construction job, and caught the tail end of the conversation. "Marcus, you should do it. Tell them what Sarah did for us, how one person choosing to see us differently changed everything. Maybe someone else will do the same for another kid who needs it." Sarah felt tears pricking her eyes as she looked around at the unlikely family that had formed from that rainy night's confrontation. Jason, who could have simply beaten the boys and walked away feeling heroic. Marcus and Tony, who could have chosen to keep running the same destructive path. Instead, they'd all chosen something harder and infinitely more valuable. They'd chosen growth, connection, and hope. "You know what's amazing about all this?" Sarah said softly, 3 weeks ago, I thought I was about to lose everything. My savings, my grandson's birthday dream, maybe even my life. But because you were there, Jason, and because we all chose differently than expected, something beautiful happened instead. We created something that's bigger than any of us alone." Jason raised his coffee cup in a toast. "To unexpected heroes and second chances." Marcus and Tony joined in with their own cups, and Sarah completed the circle with her water glass. They drank together in the morning sunlight streaming through Rose's windows, for people who shouldn't have fit together but did, bound by a night of rain and violence that had somehow transformed into hope. The diner's breakfast rush continued around them, life moving forward in all its chaotic beauty. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new struggles, new choices. But today, in this moment, they'd proved that people could choose differently, that compassion could triumph over fear, that one act of unexpected kindness could ripple outward in ways no one could predict. Miguel burst through the door then, his backpack bouncing as he ran to his grandmother. "Abuela, I got an A on my math test." His gap-toothed grin lit up the entire diner as Sarah swept him into a hug, her heart so full she thought it might boast. She thought this was what they'd all been fighting for. Not just survival, but the chance to thrive. Not just getting by, but actually living. And it had all started with a choice made in the rain, when violence could have won but grace prevailed instead.